The old man stood quietly by the rusted iron gate, his worn-out jacket barely shielding him from the cold wind. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another forgotten worker, someone the world had stopped noticing long ago. But behind those tired eyes was a secret so powerful, it could change lives in an instant. That morning, he wasn't just guarding a mansion. He was guarding a truth, one that would reveal the real heart of the woman his son was about to marry. Before we dive into this emotional story, take a second to support our channel, Corner of Kind Choices. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us spread more kindness across the world. Ethan Carter was known as one of the youngest successful entrepreneurs in the country. Smart, driven, and kind, he had built his tech company from the ground up. But behind his success was his father, Richard Carter, a billionaire businessman who had spent decades building an empire. Richard had always been a man of discipline and sharp judgment. He believed in hard work, loyalty, and above all, character. So when Ethan told him he was planning to marry a woman named Lily, Richard didn't object, but he wasn't entirely convinced either. "Love is easy when life is easy," Richard had said one evening, his voice calm but firm. "But I want to know who she really is when things aren't." Ethan smiled. "Dad, Lily is different. She's kind. She's real. You'll see." Richard nodded slowly, but deep down, he needed proof. And so, without telling his son, he created a test. A week later, Lily arrived at the Carter estate for the first time. It was a massive property, with tall gates and a long driveway lined with trees. She had heard about Ethan's wealth, but seeing it in person was overwhelming. As her car approached the gate, she noticed an elderly man standing beside it. He wore a faded uniform, his hand slightly trembling as he opened the gate. "Good morning," Lily said with a gentle smile as she stepped out of the car. The man looked up, surprised. Most visitors ignored him. "Good morning, ma'am," he replied softly. Lily glanced at his thin jacket. "It's cold out here. Are you okay?" He nodded. "I'm used to it." She hesitated for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small thermos. "I brought some coffee for the drive, but I can share. Would you like some?" The old man blinked, clearly caught off guard. "That's very kind of you." As she poured the coffee into the lid and handed it to him, he noticed her hands were steady, her expression sincere. There was no hesitation, no judgment. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome," she replied. "Everyone deserves something warm on a cold day." Inside the mansion, Ethan greeted Lily with a hug. They spent the afternoon talking, laughing, and walking through the house. Everything seemed perfect. But Lily couldn't stop thinking about the gatekeeper. Later that evening, she asked Ethan, "How long has that man been working here?" Ethan frowned slightly. "Who?" "The man at the gate. He looks really old. Is he treated well?" Ethan shrugged. "I'm not sure. The staff is managed by my father's team." Lily looked concerned. "He shouldn't be standing out there in the cold like that. Maybe we could help him somehow." Ethan smiled. "You really care about people, don't you?" She nodded. "I just think kindness matters. No matter who someone is." The next morning, Lily woke up early. She quietly left the house and walked toward the gate. The old man was there again, standing in the same spot. "Good morning," she said warmly. He turned, surprised once more. "You're up early." "I wanted to bring you something," she said, holding out a small paper bag. Inside were fresh pastries and a pair of warm gloves. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice slightly shaking. "I wanted to," she replied. "Do you have family?" He paused. "Not really." She sat down on the small bench nearby. That must be hard. He looked at her, studying her face. There was no pity, only genuine care. I've learned that people don't always need money, she continued softly. Sometimes, they just need to feel seen. The old man swallowed hard. In all his years, no one had spoken to him like that, not even when he was known as Richard Carter. Over the next few days, Lily continued to visit him. She brought him food, asked about his health, and even offered to speak to Ethan about improving his working conditions. One afternoon, she noticed his shoes were worn out. Without saying anything, she went into town and bought him a new pair. When she handed them to him, he shook his head. I can't accept this. Yes, you can, she insisted gently. Please. You deserve comfort. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he quickly looked away. Why are you doing this? He asked. Lily smiled. Because it's the right thing to do. That evening, Richard sat alone in his study, no longer in disguise. The worn clothes were gone, replaced by his usual tailored suit. But his expression had changed. He looked at the gloves Lily had given him, resting on the desk. For the first time in years, Richard felt something he couldn't quite explain. Emotion. The next day, Ethan and Lily were invited to dinner in the grand dining hall. Richard entered the room, his presence commanding as always. Lily stood up politely. It's nice to finally meet you, Mr. Carter. Richard looked at her for a long moment. Likewise, Lily. Dinner began, but Lily seemed distracted. Finally, she spoke up. Mr. Carter, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I'm concerned about the man working at your gate. Ethan looked surprised. Lily. No, it's okay, Richard said calmly. Go on. He's elderly, and he's out there in the cold all day. I think he deserves better conditions. Maybe even retirement support. The room fell silent. Richard leaned back slightly. And why does this matter to you? Lily met his gaze without fear. Because how we treat people who can do nothing for us says everything about who we are. There was a long pause. Then Richard slowly stood up. Follow me, he said. They walked toward the gate. As they approached, Lily looked around, confused. There's no one here, she said. Richard turned to her, his eyes softer than before. That's because, he said quietly, the gatekeeper was me. Lily froze. Ethan's eyes widened. Dad, what? I needed to know, Richard continued, his voice trembling slightly. I needed to see who Lily truly was when she thought no one was watching. He looked at Lily, his eyes now filled with tears. You treated me with more kindness in those few days than most people have in years. You saw me, not as a poor worker, but as a human being. Lily's eyes filled with emotion. I didn't know. I know, he said gently. That's what makes it real. Richard took a deep breath. All my life, I've built wealth, power, influence. But I've learned something from you, Lily, something far more valuable. He stepped closer. Kindness is the true measure of a person. He turned to Ethan. You were right about her. Then back to Lily. If you're willing, I would be honored to welcome you into this family. Tears streamed down Lily's face as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. In the days that followed, things changed at the Carter estate. Staff were treated with greater care, conditions improved, and a new foundation was created to support workers in need. But the biggest change was in Richard himself. He no longer saw people as roles or positions. He saw them as human beings. And it all started with a simple act of kindness, a cup of coffee shared at a gate. Kindness doesn't require wealth, status, or power. It only requires a heart willing to care. And sometimes, the smallest acts can reveal the biggest truths. So the next time you see someone who feels invisible, remember this story. Because you never know whose life you might change just by being kind. And maybe, just maybe, you'll change your own too.